Good morning. 2 minutes behind schedule. So sorry for a Monday morning. Our computers have had a little case of the Mondays, but my name is Mayor Chris Jensen, mayor of the great city of Noblesville, Indiana. Welcome to another edition of Mental Health Monday here in our community. I am joined by my wing woman at all times, Kristen Boice, the owner of Pathways to Healing Counseling. Good morning, Kristen.
Good morning, Mayor Jensen, and good morning, Sarah.
Yes, and speaking of, we have a special guest, a returning guest from last year, one of the deputy mayors of Noblesville, our community development director, Sarah Reed. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning.
We're all kind of
How are you both?
All of us are kind of remoting from different spots here today. I'm over at the arena. Oh, all right. Sarah's at one of the Hamilton Heights schools this morning. I am at the Arena Innovation Mile here, as we're all just multitasking day in the life of city officials. Kristen looks warm in her office per usual. But we are welcoming you to another edition of Mental Health Monday, where this month we're going to tackle Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And that's why we have Sarah here, who's a survivor. And so I'm so excited for this conversation yet again to tackle the emotions around this, the feelings, the processing, all the things. And Sarah and I get to process all the things all the time. We spend a lot of time together. So I appreciate her willingness to be vulnerable with this conversation here today. It can help so many people. I know hardly a family goes by without some being touched in some way by either breast cancer or some other form of cancer. So I'm honored that you would join us, Sarah, for this conversation today. As always, if you're tuning in live from Noblesville or across the world, feel free to chime in with questions you might have. We're happy to answer those on the fly or get some answers to you later about that. But we welcome your feedback. If you want to say hi, if you want to say go, Sarah, you're awesome, feel free to put that in the chat too. So, but before we get started on this journey, I'm going to allow Kristen Boice, I would ask Kristen Boice to walk us through a little square breathing exercise so we can reset our mind and get ready for this.
So one of the biggest gifts you can give yourself and other people is centering your nervous system. We want to be regulated, not dysregulated. And we're always on the go. We're running, we're stressed, we're overwhelmed. We've got a lot of emotions going on, especially for today's topic. And what I invite you to do is take 2 breaths with us. And you can do this outside of our time together. And I invite you to do this every hour in between our next time we meet, which is next month. So let's put our feet on the floor. Let's ground ourselves in the present moment. We're going to inhale for 4. We're going to hold the breath for 4. Then we're going to slowly release out our mouths for 8. So let's do it together. Big, deep inhale through your nose. Hold. And then release out your mouth. Let's do one more breath together, centering our time together, centering yourself for this day that's ahead of you on this Monday. Big, deep inhale and release. You can feel your body kind of release tension and tightness. And that's why 2 breaths isn't really enough to cover all that you're trying to release. So keep going if you're at home watching, and just notice the difference before and after. Once you hit 5, 6 breaths, you will really feel a difference in how your tension in your body and where you're carrying your stress. Notice that today and try to move through it and move it up and out.
Yeah, it sounds so simple, but breathing is the key to success in so many ways. We discuss it in our office all the time about taking a breath and stepping back for a second. I encourage you. I do it a lot of times in the car when I'm mad at myself for closing roads. So, I'm full disclosure there. But let's dive into this conversation today. And Sarah, if you would just spend a moment or two telling a little bit about your journey, what your diagnosis was, whatever you're willing to share, obviously within comfort there, just to kind of level set. That's a new term I've been using this month. Level set the story here today around your journey.
Sure, absolutely. So in December of 2022, I got my second mammogram. And obviously you start getting those when you're 40 as a woman. Sometimes it can be something that you get done earlier. But this was actually my second mammogram, and I found out that they had identified, first of all, that I have dense breast tissue, so that there may be additional testing that I need to have done. But then also that genetic testing is recommended if you have a family history of breast cancer, which I do. So I did both an MRI and genetic testing. I found out I had the CHEK2 gene mutation, which still is a new one. And I meet yearly with a high risk breast cancer nurse practitioner specifically, so she can tell me the new developments of that particular gene itself. But they did find a small spot that they wanted to biopsy, and then did have that biopsied with an MRI guided biopsy. And it was invasive ductal carcinoma. It was very small, like 0.03 centimeters, like you can't even hold your fingers apart as far as it was small. So those two items together, I guess, led me to the decision then to get a double mastectomy to hopefully decrease my chances of ever getting cancer again, breast cancer again. Obviously, there's nothing that guarantees that I can't get it again, but that I have really significantly decreased my chances of that happening again. So I went ahead and did that. I believe I looked back and I was on this in 2023, maybe in October. So at that point, I had two surgeries, a double mastectomy and then reconstruction a few months after that. So we're now, I guess I am 2 years post surgeries now. And I think last time I listened back to the very beginning and you called me a thriver, and I would hope to say that I am still thriving in this journey of mine that will never end. So,
yeah. Well, that's, before Kristen, before you dive in, I was just going to have you, Sarah, talk for just a second about kind of that moment of diagnosis, the initial feeling around that. I think that's an important one. I imagine folks that are watching, sometimes you may be going into a mammogram, your first ever. Gentlemen, there's a lot more conversation around prostates now and the exposure of that. So there is just some anxiety about getting older, right? I remember when you turned 40, we celebrated that. I just turned 40 last year. And so there are just things that happen. But talk about that initial diagnosis, what that feeling was like. Maybe you're in Tim, if you wouldn't mind bringing in his thoughts in the conversation. Tim's an oversharer, so he would tell us anyways. But talk a little bit about that kind of that emotional feeling of that initial diagnosis.
Yeah, so they don't waste any time when they're doing a biopsy. And a lot of times, the way that technology works, you get a My Chart notification before you actually hear from a doctor, which they could do a lot better in that realm, I think, of human interaction, telling you the story instead of you reading it on a piece of paper, but or actually on your iPhone. So I got the test results in my My Chart. And to me, it sounded like a bunch of, medical mumbo jumbo. I didn't know what it all meant. And I handed it to Tim, who happens to be a nurse, and he just read the word carcinoma. And he's probably more of the emotional one of the two of us, I'd say. I carry emotions for a lot of other people, not necessarily always for myself. But for him, it was immediate. My family was actually here for Christmas at that time when we got that news. So we all kind of huddled around in a big hug, and just everybody, I think, cried and, felt sad. And then again, I'm a process person. So immediately I start, okay, what's the next step? Who do I meet with? What do we do? And I'm into the mode of how do we solve this problem, rather than living probably in the moment a little bit longer than maybe I could have. So for me, it was shock, and I just figured it would be something that was benign, and I guess I wasn't really ready for that, but I'm not sure anybody ever really is. And then there is a moment in time where there's a lot of decisions that have to be made fairly quickly on treatment and processes, and really your medical team. So I immediately went into how do we solve this problem mode. But really emotional, thankful my family was there to be able to spend that time and to just reflect on the fact that we have each other and that we did catch it very early. And I did know that. So that was very thankful on that.
Kristen, you want to dive into kind of, I'm sure you have the pleasure of talking to survivors of cancer and a lot of traumatic experiences. You want to talk a little bit about, from the outside, what that looks like for folks?
Yes, we deal a lot with cancer survivors and folks that haven't survived cancer and family members. So my mother also had the same kind of cancer you did. And so I walked through it as a family member, and watching everybody processes it differently. But the shock of getting the information, I with most every single person I work with is a lot. I mean, the shock of finding out, people are afraid. If they have children, they're afraid how this will affect their children. They're afraid how this will affect their family, their partner, themselves. A lot of fear can get really stirred up pretty quickly because we don't know. So if you read it on my chart, you don't know what it means. You don't know what the process is. You don't know how invasive it is. You might not know what stage it's at. So not knowing information can be really activating and triggering for folks that don't know what it means for their future. Does this mean I'm going to survive? What does this mean for my family, my children, grandchildren? And what is the treatment plan moving forward? And the waiting period, I will say, for most everybody, feels torturous. It really feels torturous because you're waiting for test results. Your brain wants information and it wants to know, what does this mean? Am I going to live? How is this going to affect my quality of life? What is this actually going to look like for me? What are treatment plans, doctor's appointments, finances? There's so much to consider. Putting together a will, and I hate saying that, but these are things people start rumbling through. And emotionally, it can be shock. We go through lots of grief because you have a before and after diagnosis. And that's what people don't talk about too much. What was my life like before?
Mm-hmm.
And how was I before? And then there's a middle and there's an after. Would you say that, Sarah? There's kind of before who
Oh, yeah,
you were.
absolutely.
You should talk a little bit about that.
I'm thankful. Yeah. So you don't really know what the before was until you get into the middle. And then there is, as you mentioned, a before cancer. I can tell you that the 3 months of waiting for my surgery that I knew was coming was torture. That's when I think we referenced it on the last one of these, that my husband and I did a podcast together. We haven't really picked it up since then. I feel like we could after this, and maybe this will spark that. But that waiting time from the diagnosis to knowing all those doctor's appointments, what to expect, who you meet with, really the options and why I chose the route that I chose. And even though some people may think it was a little bit drastic. So the middle part, the waiting part in the middle of you're in cancer and you're in your treatments. And then you get through and, you go through a lot of emotions going through it. I think one of the toughest parts for me was between my double mastectomy and my reconstruction. I had these internal spacers creating room for my new implants, which, was really hard to talk about on the internet and public to people. But, that was one of the longest waiting periods of my life. And then when I got my implants, it was like a full freedom of, now I think I can check the cancer box and I can move on. Although you don't ever really just, put it in a box and put it on a shelf. It's always there with you. So that was a big one. And then once all of my surgeries were done, there was this after piece, which I believe I reached out to you, Chris, and I didn't end up speaking with a therapist, just because it's like, now this is done. Now what? Now, who am I? And I have all these thoughts and feelings, and now I don't have this program to follow, the steps, and the doctor's appointments are now just once a year. And so now what do I do with myself and with this diagnosis and moving forward? And you want to just talk to as many people as you can to help them to get early diagnoses and to get their everything checked out early on. You become this champion of health for other people and for your family. And I really dove into some more natural deodorants and, laundry detergent and soaps that you put on your face all day, like those kinds of things that you don't think about. And then that can lead to a rabbit hole itself. So, the after part is where I still am living, and it's still challenging.
Yeah.
Even though
and
I'm
if I can
out.
in for just a second on this too, because Sarah is incredibly humble in her journey, but she is surrounded every day by a husband and son. But then at work, myself, Matt Light, and at the time Chad Connect, all these men are surrounding her as we're going through this breast cancer journey together. And I want to say thanks to Sarah for being so vulnerable with us. It really helped. And I think Kristen, maybe you can talk a little bit about like what, this isn't just a female challenge. This is, men can be diagnosed with this as well, but it has really exposed all of us to, hey, maybe not uncomfortable conversations, but we need to be supportive and understand.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to talk about that for a second, but then I also want to applaud Sarah. She has been the depository of many people who have come to us, or I've heard from, that have this diagnosis. And Sarah just, says, have them call me, have them text me. I'll talk. I'll tell my story. And sometimes, Sarah, you'd probably agree, it's just telling your journey is just kind of like validation
Mm-hmm.
of thoughts, maybe, is what you're providing a lot of. So I wanted to kind of just hit on those 2 points.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think being not
Sure.
alone, I think, Sarah, I mean, when you go through a diagnosis, all of a sudden it feels very isolating. It feels like your world just shrunk. And so I think being able to share with other people and having a support network is critical. And being able to process, I love the word process. Family needs to process, your children, your partner, your friends, your coworkers. They all have feelings too about a diagnosis. You have your own feelings and your own process, and they also have feelings. And I highly encourage everybody to have an open dialogue. And it's okay. Everybody might feel different. Someone might be in shock for a while. Someone might be in anger for a while. Someone might be in a lot of fear. You don't need to caretake them. We just hold space so they can process. Talk a little bit about support and process.
Yeah. So, I really do. I did have the best support network. I still do. And it's very humbling when you can't move your arms above, chest height, and you can't lift anything more than 5 pounds for months. And so to have my husband wash my hair, help me shower, my sister came into town, my parents, they all kind of like took this rotation of who was going to stay with us. And really, to Chris's point, when I do talk to people, they ask what's helpful during recovery. What gifts should I get people who are having these surgeries or going through chemo? And just to be able to kind of say, like, really the comforts of having less things to take care of for yourself. I had a friend of mine who washed and braided my hair, and it's just those little simple things that you take for granted when you honestly are a doer and you have to just sit and let other people do for you. That was really challenging. I feel like I nested before my surgery, so I cleaned every square inch of my house because I knew people would be coming over and bringing me meals and wanting to chat and cheer me up. And so there is a whole process to that surgery and recovery piece. And I'm very thankful that my treatment did not include chemo or radiation or even estrogen blockers. I know that a lot of people have those supplementals either before or after a surgery, and I was very blessed to have my discovery so early on that I didn't have to have those. But my biggest fear was losing my hair. My hair, everybody in my office knows, I go to get my hair done every 8 weeks. During my lunch hour, it takes 3 hours. And yes, it takes that long. But, that was honestly, my biggest fear. I was not afraid of the surgeries. There are people who are very afraid of needles. And, so just all of those elements of processing that, and then even not having the ability to talk to someone. I had someone who was in the doctor's office after me who was, a single mom. And I felt for her. Who's going to wash her hair? Who's going to help her do the dishes and the laundry? And like those, I'm just so thankful that I had and blessed to have such a support system that even my son's wrestling team at the time all came together, and they got these, no one fights alone shirts, and gave us cards, and we all had a pink out wrestling tournament. It was just couldn't have asked for a better support team. And my office, the mayor's office, and even City Hall as a whole were all behind me. I still think it's kind of amazing, and I count it as a win, although part of me is like, is it that there are a couple of developers in the world of, building in Noblesville who were like, you had breast cancer? I didn't even know. And I was gone for like a month and a half. So I was like, oh, good. That everything was seamless enough that maybe they didn't realize, but also like, oh, maybe I didn't do as good of staying home as I could have. I don't know. And then Chris, you mentioned too, I like to be the resource to people to just make sure that they have, I can give them all of, my own emotions and thoughts and experiences, my doctor's recommendations, the types of surgery options, and why I chose what I did. It's ultimately the decision of the person themselves to advocate on their own behalf. But really, you really are not doing yourself justice if you're not asking questions of the people who had surgeries that you are considering to get in order to understand fully what the diagnosis is. And doctors are great. They'll sit with you and they'll explain the medical side of it, but the personal side of the recovery is really what you get from the survivors themselves.
Kristen, could you spend a little bit of time? This half an hour goes by so fast, but I want to spend a little bit of time if you are a supporter, or you're a family member. You aren't the diagnosee. You are the supporter. What does your role look like? Can you talk about, because there's so many feelings around, like, do I say something, and what do I say? What does that support look like? Can you speak into that for a few minutes about kind of maybe appropriate levels of support, inappropriate levels of support, whatever you want to kind of chime in there?
I think support looks different for many different people. So you just mentioned, Sarah, like washing your hair. So support look like that. Maybe it's meal planning. The one piece that I think gets overlooked from when I work with clients is people don't know what to say to the person that's going through it. So they either don't say anything at all, or they're like over the top with what kind, like hovering almost to the point you're like, it's okay. So what I always ask is, first, hold space. Say, how are you feeling? No, really, how are you feeling? Because what oftentimes is a person is trying to keep it together because they're trying to do their best to make sure they're being able to do the function in their day-to-day life, that they don't want to fall apart. And yet what they need the most is someone emotionally holding space for them. They don't know they might need that. And it's one of the most critical components of going through a diagnosis that I could tell anybody is hold space for someone. What does that mean? That means, how are you really feeling? It means listening. It means empathy. It means compassion. It might mean a hug at that moment. It might mean sitting with someone during treatments. I did that for my mom. And I just sat with her and let her, have her experience. It might be bringing a meal, like we said. It might look like, I am going to clean your house. It can look like acts of service, and it can look like being present and showing up. So sometimes people get so triggered themselves with their own feelings. I would say that if that's the case, go to your own therapist, go to a support network. There's Breast Cancer Center has lots of resources. There's so many resources out there for families and folks going through treatment for cancer. And what I want to say the most is, when you get a diagnosis, don't shove it down. Don't shove what you're feeling down, because what that does is it lives in your body. We don't want that. We want that to be processed, and we want it to move up and out of the body. So journaling, talking to someone, noticing, I'm not wanting to feel, I'm wanting to push through. And that's a bad thing, because there's moments where you're going to need that. And then there's moments where we need to have a breakdown, so to speak. We need to let it all out. I don't believe in breakdowns, but when we're really, because I think those are breakthroughs, where we're really letting it out and we're really experiencing that place of freedom to be able to really tell someone how we really feel. So the person that's being a support, it can look many different ways. I really want to encourage you, ask someone how they're feeling. How you're doing is a different question. How are you feeling? And then really, really look at them with tenderness, love, and care, and let them know that you're there. Check in with them with a text, call them, show up is what I want to say, is show up.
Yeah, I just want to tell a quick personal story. Sarah knows this, but one of my very best friends, if not my best friends from childhood, had a similar diagnosis as Sarah right after Sarah. Sarah jumped on the phone with her and had conversations with her. She luckily, her and her family live just about 8 houses down from us now still, which is wonderful. And she's probably going to tune in today. But I literally stopped at her house, I think, every day for a year and just walked in. And she'll chuckle at that now, but I almost just need to lay eyes on her just to all right, you're there today. Good. What are we doing? We're sitting up today, but it's just different. But I just kind of made it upon myself. I was like, I'm just walking in their house and I just need to go lay eyes for a minute. It's probably more for me than even for her. Probably annoyed her and her husband. Luckily, they're best friends of ours, so it doesn't matter. But, I just need to show up. I just need to see for my own fear of what she was going through. So I always chuckle that story, and she'll probably chuckle by watching this today.
Thank you for sharing that. Somebody needs to hear that and you might not walk into someone's house like you're real close to her.
I'm very close, but like I needed to just stop by, and honestly looking back on it, it's probably for my own fear for her. I needed to see, and I needed to see her kids, and I just needed to check in.
Yeah. And letting the kids
But a wellness check means a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think letting kids have a place to talk, because people are like, I don't want to tell the kids because I don't want to get overwhelmed. Yeah, that's true. And they sense it. So what we don't share with them, they fill in the blank. And sometimes it's worst case scenario and you don't even know that they're feeling that way. So my recommendation is talk about the process. Share what you're going through. It doesn't matter the age. Of course, it needs to be age appropriate. And you say, how are you feeling? Well, I'm scared. That makes sense. Tell me more about it. Do you want to go play it out? Sometimes if they're little, you want to play it out. Sometimes they can draw it out. Sometimes they might have the words, they might not have the words, and sometimes they need a play therapist where the family can go and talk about it and process it. So I really want to encourage people, if you're taking one thing away, is communicate and process the emotions around it, whether you're going through it yourself or a family member.
Yeah. Sarah, before we wrap up here, any final thoughts for those people that spoke into you? What worked, what didn't work? What does that support look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I had a couple different things that stuck out in my mind. I had someone on our meal train that brought not just dinner, but a sundae bar for Gunner, where it was like different ice creams and toppings, like to get the kids engaged so that, it's just like when you bring home a new baby, you don't want to not bring the oldest child something when you're, all this attention is going to the little kid. So I felt like that was a great one. I had someone bring me smoothies and just sit with me. So I got a smoothie, and you can guess who that is, probably Chris, who brought me a smoothie and just sat with me. She was lovely, and we just, sometimes you just need that interaction. And when there is a lot of time to think about a lot of things, and if you're a doer, being forced to sit in your own thoughts for, the day, I really did look forward to having time by myself as well, though, kind of in a contradiction, because you don't want too much sympathy, if that makes sense. So that balance of time by yourself, but balance with time with others, to kind of that forced conversation that you may not choose when you're wearing a zip up hoodie and a blanket and slippers, and people have to see you that way. But it really is all about balance, and the check-ins really meant a lot. I had a lot of people send a lot of gifts that I still keep to this day and cherish, and am so thankful that just even in the smallest of things were thoughts. And honestly, DoorDash went a long way.
Mm-hmm.
DoorDash gift cards were great. You don't have to think about dinner on that one day where nobody wants to, and you can all just kick back and watch a movie. So there really is a lot of different things you can do to keep people engaged and to let them know you're thinking about them and that you care. And really I'm thankful that I'm on the flip side.
Yeah. Kristen, in our last minute here, any final thoughts on processing this type of conversation around breast cancer or any traumatic experience, but particularly the cancer diagnosis?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. I think sharing your story is really important. And whether you write out your story or you share your story in whatever way, you did a podcast, those outlets to be able to share your journey and your story are so important. And I want to encourage everybody, if you're walking through something hard right now, whether it's, a diagnosis of some sort or you're waiting for results, write it out or somehow telling your story in whatever format that is really powerful. And I want to encourage you to do that. And thank you for sharing your story, Sarah. And you're making a difference in helping so many others that are walking through this journey right now or have in the past. So thank you for being here today.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. And I
Thank
will
you
say,
for having me. I appreciate it.
On behalf of Kristen, if you are struggling right now with a mental health challenge, if you're near someone who is, if you have questions, 988 is the miracle drug of the moment. And, we need to lean on that. That is the 911 for mental health. I know, Kristen, you usually make that announcement, but I'll plug it for you. 988 can just be a huge resource. Please, please, please use it. But Sarah Reed, you are a true trailblazer and lion chaser, and I appreciate you. Kristen Boice, as always, of giving your time, talent to this conversation. It means so much. Stay safe, everyone. We'll see you back here next month for another edition of Mental Health Monday. Thanks again, everybody.